"We need a mother," the cowboy's daughter said, and they reached for the Apache woman in chains. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The town of Birch Point sat quiet under the thinning late afternoon light, its narrow street lined with weathered wooden fronts, hitching posts, and the uneven shadows of buildings that had been standing longer than most of the people inside them. A dry wind moved across the road, carrying dust that clung to boots, coats, and the few wagons still circling for trade before evening. The noise was low, made up mostly of subdued voices and the distant hammering from the blacksmith's yard. John Calder stepped out through the wide doorway of the blacksmith shop, adjusting his coat after a long conversation about tools needed for winter repairs. He carried himself with the quiet heaviness of a man who spent more time thinking than speaking. His hands bore rope burns and scars from years of ranch work, and his face showed the calm endurance that came from raising 2 children alone. His wife had died shortly after their younger daughter's birth, and every task since then had revolved around keeping the ranch stable and keeping his daughters safe from a world that did not always welcome them kindly. John set his hat lower on his brow and scanned the road, making sure the girls were where he had left them. He saw them standing near the watering trough across the street, their small figures pressed close together. Lila, the older one, held herself cautiously, her shoulders drawn tight whenever she was unsure of something. June, younger by 2 years, leaned forward with open curiosity, barely noticing the dust collecting on her boots. John crossed the street with steady strides, wondering what had captured their attention. Then he saw her. A trader's wagon was parked a few yards away, its back wheel braced by a loose stone. A woman stood chained to that wheel, her wrists locked in iron cuffs polished by rough use. She looked to be in her mid-20s, maybe a little older, and though her clothing was torn and the beadwork was damaged, the craftsmanship made clear she belonged to an Apache band from farther south. Her long black hair hung in tangled strands down her back. Dirt streaked her arms and face, but her posture remained upright, controlled, and guarded. She showed no visible injury apart from the raw skin around her wrists. John studied her for a long moment. Her breathing was uneven, not from panic, but from exhaustion. Her attention shifted slowly across the street until it settled on his daughters. She did not speak to them, nor did she turn away. She simply watched them with steady awareness, trying to understand what they wanted. John felt a flicker of tension rise in him. He had seen people treated poorly before, but seeing a woman bound in a town he brought his children to was something else entirely. He glanced at the trader leaning against the wagon sideboard. The man smelled strongly of cheap whiskey and wore a patched coat, stained from weeks on the road. He swayed slightly, greeting anyone who came near with a careless grin. The girls stepped closer. June tugged at John's sleeve without taking her eyes off the woman. "Pa," she whispered. "She looks hurt." Lila swallowed hard, her hands tightening together. "She's alone," she added quietly. John felt the weight of their words settle in his chest. His daughters rarely spoke openly about their wants. They had learned early that their father did what he could, and that he carried more responsibility than one person should. Hearing concern in their voices, real, immediate, told him exactly how deeply the sight had affected them. The trader noticed John approaching and straightened himself with clumsy enthusiasm. "Got a good deal today," he said, slurring slightly. "Pick her up near Dry Hollow. Tough one. Quiet too. Doesn't fight. Make you a fair price." John ignored the tone. He stepped closer to the woman, keeping his movements slow so she could see every intention. She didn't flinch when he checked the cuffs. The metal was tight against her skin, biting into bruises that had clearly formed over days, not hours. She watched his hands carefully, trying to understand what kind of man he was. John sensed no fear from her, only tension and a readiness to act if needed. He asked the trader in a low voice, "Why is she chained?" The man shrugged. "Easier to transport her. Folks pay more when they see they don't run." John felt a cold anger settle in his stomach, but he kept it hidden behind a controlled expression. He wasn't a man who solved problems with raised voices. He took out his money pouch and counted out the bills slowly, choosing not to negotiate. The trader blinked, surprised by the lack of resistance. But greed overtook confusion, and he accepted the money. Once the payment was done, John knelt to unlock the cuffs. The woman watched him carefully, waiting to judge whether this was another exchange of ownership or something else entirely. John worked the iron loose with steady fingers, avoiding any sudden movements. When the cuffs fell away, the woman exhaled sharply. Not relief, exactly, but the release of pressure she had been holding for too long. She flexed her fingers, testing her freedom, then raised her eyes to John. For the first time, he saw a mixture of caution and curiosity in her expression. She was trying to decide whether she could trust him enough to follow him out of town. John turned to his daughters. "Get the spare blanket from the saddlebag." They hurried to obey. The woman stood still, measuring every detail of the moment. The children's movements, John's tone, the road stretching out past the last of Birch Point's buildings. She seemed ready to run if she sensed deception, yet too weak to make it far. John guided her toward his horse. She followed without leaning on him, though it was clear she forced each step to remain controlled. Her body showed signs of dehydration and strain, but her discipline never broke. Once mounted, she sat behind him with her hands lightly gripping the saddle horn for balance. She didn't touch him otherwise. John respected that and kept his posture steady so she would not lose footing. The girls rode beside them on their small mare, glancing at the woman repeatedly, as if still unsure whether she was real or something the town would take back at any moment. As Birch Point faded behind them, the woman lifted her head, studying the open land ahead. She had no idea where they were going, yet she stayed on the horse without hesitation. John felt the familiar tension of responsibility returning. The same feeling he had carried since the day he became both father and mother to his girls. Bringing a stranger onto his land was a decision he would have avoided under ordinary circumstances. But today wasn't ordinary. Today he saw something in the woman's endurance that matched the quiet strength he tried to teach his daughters. His main mission had always been simple: protect his children, maintain the ranch, and keep his family together in a world that didn't make any of it easy. Now, unexpectedly, another responsibility rode behind him. And as the sun lowered behind the hills, John's instinct told him the decision he had made would change the shape of their lives in ways none of them could see yet. The trail to John Calder's ranch stretched across open land where dry grass moved in uneven patches and the last hints of sunlight slid across the earth in long, fading strips. The ride from Birch Point was slow, not because of distance, but because John wanted to avoid jostling the woman seated behind him. He could feel her maintaining careful balance, shifting her weight only when the horse changed pace. She hadn't spoken once, yet her awareness sharpened whenever they passed a bend or a break in the terrain. John glanced back only once, enough to confirm she was still steady. Her grip remained tight on the saddle horn, but her posture did not waver. She observed everything: the fences in the distance, the sloping ground, the small rise where the house stood waiting in the dimming light. Lila and June rode ahead of them now, eager to arrive before night settled fully. Their small mare trotted lightly, hooves breaking the quiet rhythm of the open land. The girls kept glancing over their shoulders, checking whether the woman followed willingly. John noticed their expressions brighten whenever she looked in their direction, even if she gave no visible reaction. By the time they reached the fence yard, the sun had dropped behind a ridge. The ranch stood calm, shaped by years of careful maintenance. A modest house with a deep porch faced the barn and corral. The lantern John left by the window each morning glowed faintly, guiding them the last few yards. John dismounted first, handing the reins to Lila. "Walk her to the post," he said. Lila nodded,